Hi, and welcome to a new episode of the Luxembourg PE&VC Stories. We are at IPEM in Cannes, and it is my pleasure to welcome Julien Marencic, his founding partner at Jera Capital. Hi, Julien.
Hi, Stefan. Thank you for having me. This is amazing to be sharing this moment with you.
It's really a pleasure, and lots of people and enthusiasm around private equity and venture capital here.
It certainly is a busy market. Absolutely.
Julien, what can you tell us about Jera Capital? Who, when, and how did that whole adventure start?
Jera Capital was created a year ago as a spin-out from the senior team of Nordea Private Equity in Copenhagen. We are coming out of the realization that the private markets need more independent players offering flexible investment solutions targeting responsible assets. Today, Jera Capital manages an Evergreen Fund out of Luxembourg and invests in secondary private equity.
Ah, wow, an Evergreen Funds. Could you just remind us of the advantages of Evergreen structures?
Absolutely. As the Nordea team, we have managed Evergreen Funds for over 10 years, and we have created a structure of those funds that allows investors to immediately access the private markets as a class and have a shorter horizon of investment than if they were to invest in closed-ended funds. In our funds example, investors invest their whole capital on day one, get exposure to the portfolio, and after a 3-year lockup period are able to redeem their shares at the prevailing NAV.
And is that methods also allowing you to continue with your strategy?
Absolutely. The secondaries investment strategy is also well suited to the Evergreen because it allows to acquire assets, select the assets and let them grow inside our fund and not have any difficulties with regards to a certain term of our fund. We are a long-term holder of assets, and that allows us to, this structure allows us to continue our strategy.
That really makes sense. Great. Could you also tell us about your core values and the philosophy of your firm?
Absolutely. So Jera, the name Jera comes from the Nordic rune, which has a meaning of the nature, the cycle of the seasons, the beginning of harvest. And this is really the fundamental value of Jera Capital. We are a permanent, so patient investor. We are focused on selectivity and on responsibility. And those values matter to us. I mean, as a Frenchman emigrated in Denmark, this is very important for me. And we basically build the company out of those values. The fund is an Article 8, and we are very careful about the investments we do and about the exposure we provide to our investors.
That sounds very promising. And which sectors are you particularly following? And any specific deals you would like to highlight?
Absolutely. So we are focusing on Western Europe and North America. So we are targeting markets we know very well. We are sector agnostic in the way that we aim to build a diversified exposure for our investors. We obviously do not do anything that is not responsible in the light of the ESG principles and the UN PRI. To give an example, we closed recently a transaction of 4 Nordic companies operating in the industrial space, in the information technology space, and in the hospitality space.
And how does the Jera Capital setup look like from an office perspective, staff, etc.?
Yes, we have built an efficient setup, being a startup in the private market space. So we have the investment office out of Copenhagen. It's essentially the senior team in Copenhagen, and we have built an outsourced fund model in Luxembourg with administrators, AIFM, and depository bank, which allows us to focus on the investments, on originating and underwriting the best transactions.
And concerning your operations in Luxembourg, you also have some different profiles, I assume?
Absolutely. So as mentioned, we have the fund administration services out of Luxembourg. So we are using an external AIFM, a separate administrator for the fund, and a depository bank. We selected those partners based on their flexibility and their ability to grow with us. We are a new established business, and therefore we need to be having partners who can provide the best professional service and grow that service along the development of our funds. And we feel that we have built a platform that allows our investor to get the best professional service at all levels of the value chain, from the fund administration to the fund management and the investment.
And since the last 2 years were quite special, what's happened in the meantime at Jera Capital?
Everything. We were created, as mentioned, a year ago. So in the past year, we have recruited and onboarded our lawyers, our fund service providers. We obviously created the company. We also published our seminal white paper explaining our vision for evergreens in the private markets. We have incorporated the funds, secured the distribution permissions, have onboarded over 30 clients and closed on the first investors at the beginning of the summer. We closed on our first transactions across the summer, and we are continuing the journey. It's been a busy year.
Sounds great. Can you tell us more about your ESG philosophy and strategy? How important is that for Jera Capital?
Absolutely. So one word to highlight, as mentioned earlier, the fund is an Article 8 fund. Jera Capital is a signatory to the UN PRI. So we are taking ESG very seriously. It is a function and a factor of everything we do, and the transactions we do. We diligence the transactions and the assets on the ESG front, and we report and monitor those investments after investment. Maybe to mention a recent transaction we closed over the summer, we were discussing with the fund manager their ESG approach, understanding how they look at that side of the business, that side of the companies, what they do with the companies, how they monitor and how they report on those companies. So that was the diligence side on our end. And post-investment, we are discussing with them about how do we do our own monitoring, what information exchange do we need, and how we will report on our side on this portfolio. It's very important, and we believe strongly that private equity is a responsible investor and should be a responsible investor in the future. So we see this as the right thing to do.
That clearly makes sense. And since you're using the Luxembourg platform, what can you tell us about the ecosystem and infrastructure? Any things we should change or update?
Yes, so as mentioned, we're very happy with the service provided and the ecosystem. It works very, very well. As you may know, Denmark was recently rated the country with the best digital life in the world. And so we feel that the Luxembourg way of doing the onboarding of clients, for instance, is still very reliant on paper. And we're working with our partners to digitize the experience, especially for our investors. And I would say they're very supportive, and it certainly is a global trend. So we are contributing in our small scale to bringing the digitization and the easier onboarding, which in the end is going to improve the regulatory side, because if information is flowing digitally, it's a bit faster and it's easier to update. So certainly that's one angle I would highlight.
More digitalization and automation would certainly make sense for our great industry.
Absolutely.
Now, on a more personal basis, Julien, what can you tell us about your studies and how you entered also the private equity sector?
Absolutely. So I'm an engineer out of France. I did my MBA right after engineering, so quite early on. Started my career in venture capital in Paris for a couple of years. Then I moved across to London, and I worked with Campbell Lutyens, the placement agent advisory. And then I moved to Switzerland and worked with Partners Group before moving to Denmark in 2017 and joining Nordea, and obviously creating Jera in 2021.
Wow, that's really a very interesting adventure and pathway.
Thank you.
Concerning the values you would like to share with young talents interested by our fields, what would you suggest?
Absolutely. It's critical, and I think this is about the mindset. So I would say work hard, be humble, ask questions, and create opportunities to learn. I think we see a lot of maybe more junior people who are working hard but not necessarily questioning, not really asking, how do I understand this better, and how do I make sure everything makes sense to me? And I think that's one critical item. But that obviously goes in alongside discipline. You need to be disciplined. You need to be having a good work ethics and hygiene to keep learning and keep developing.
It clearly requires, let's say, the right attitude and certainly also the specific skills that you would expect in order to work and be successful in the field.
Absolutely.
Any specific colleague, person, or leader who inspired you during your career or life?
I think there's a lot of people, and you're never made on your own. So certainly there's a lot of people I'm very grateful for, and for the support and the mentoring maybe over the years. I wouldn't mention anyone in particular. That would create a host of people who should be mentioned as well. But certainly there's been a lot of people helping along the way. One item I would mention is I like to read biographies. And this is a great way to get in the brain of people you would usually not meet in your life and get into understanding what created their situations and made them successful. Usually biographies are about successful people. And I derived a lot of insights and knowledge from this.
In your free time, Julien, what are you doing? I mean, you just mentioned books, that's really great. Any specific biographies you would like to share, or TV series, podcasts, and music you are kind of listening to?
Absolutely. So what I like to do, I do sports, I read, I listen to podcasts and music. What I would mention in terms of books, for instance, I'm currently listening to The Principles by Ray Dalio, the founder of Bridgewater. It's very helpful for us as we start a business, as we are building a business, to hear about the principles of obviously this highly successful person. I would also recommend Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. She is a professional poker player, which should not be necessarily something that you should mention in a private equity investing world, but her approach, she's also a PhD graduate, so she has done a lot of research. And the approach of thinking about the consequences and the weighing of those consequences, because it's about, if we make an investment, it's not a black or white, it's not a good or a bad deal. Everything operates on a scale, and this is very, very important. And so that book is worth mentioning. For the pure fun of it, I would mention Andre Agassi's biography, which is highly entertaining. And on the podcast front, I would mention the Tim Ferriss Show. Tim Ferriss is a US entrepreneur, very, very successful and a polymath. He's really touching into very, very different topics. Listening to his podcast would literally bring a lot of different topics and a lot of different streams of insights. So I don't even mention one. On the pure entertainment side, I would mention Hardcore History by Dan Carlin. He's taking his own view on very, very strong historical events. These are long podcasts, but it's like watching a movie.
Wow, lots of great references we will need then to check out in the future.
Thank you. Be careful, it takes a long time. They are very long.
We like the new technologies and that kind of stuff. That's great. And certainly also the Andre Agassi book, that was a great example. I think Klaus Mansfeld, our chairman, also mentioned that one at one moment. So it seems to be a great reference. And so we are tennis players. We like that stuff. So great.
Sounds very good.
Julien, thanks a lot for sharing all those insights. It was really a pleasure to host you here at IPEM, and we wish you lots of success in the future.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you for having me.